And now it's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker in this session. When we were meeting before the session began, we realized that there is a difference in pronunciation on a key word in this abstract between American English and English spoken elsewhere. So I'll do my best here. Organist and carillonist Grace Chan is a PhD candidate at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, researching organ and carillon performance culture in Australia. Grace has performed on all three carillons in Australia. She was a carillon student at the National Carillon, Canberra from 2018 to 2022. In July 2019, she was invited to perform the world premiere of an Australian carillon work at the Palau de la Generalitat Carillon in Barcelona. Grace has performed for Sydney University graduation ceremonies and special occasions for the Faculty of Medicine. She's here with us today to present a paper titled Reimagining Musical Programming on the Australian Carillons. Please join me in welcoming Grace.
Thank you. So Australia has three carillons. The Netherlands has about 180, and America has quite a few as well. We only have three, and they all arrived after colonisation. The Sydney University War Memorial Carillon was dedicated on Anzac Day on the 25th of April 1928. And I know many people haven't been in a carillon tower, so I'm just going to start with a short video showing you what it's like. I'll just ask, has anyone been in a carillon tower before? Nathan, who did you go with? Me. So I'll just play this. This is in the Sydney University War Memorial Carillon. I'm playing a preludio written by one of my teachers, John Gowans, and he wrote it as a teaching piece. This is a reimagining that he did of a Vandengine piece, which is standard repertoire in the carillon world. So a carillon is a very public instrument, and so to practice, people usually practice on a practice clavier. This is a practice clavier in the War Memorial Carillon, and it consists of the same keyboard configuration, but it activates tone bars. I'll demonstrate that. This is how carillonists practice. This is they practice on the main bells. Because the towers are traditionally in the middle of a city and you can't own more people. We've got the exams going on. And so that was a practice carillon with tone bars. This is the modern day virtual equivalent, and it's got virtual samples of bells. So it's similar to what the Healthwork software does, what Nathan just described. So I'll demonstrate that. This tower is in Canberra. It's the National Carillon, and this clavier is made by tailors who made all the bells in Australia. That's just some small practice. This is the first one I've played the piece. So another carillon is in Bathurst. And the interesting thing about all the Australian carillons is that they all started with automation. So the Australian carillons are essentially a story of a machine being overtaken by human beings after they were trained. All the bells were made by tailors in Loughborough, so they all came from the UK. And so because they were automated machines, all the music came from the UK. And so this is why I'm going into this background, because I feel before we reimagine what carillons can do, we need to know what was initially imagined. So what was initially imagined were towers with bells from the UK, with automated instruments, and the music was sent over from England. So the Bathurst War Memorial Carillon, and then there's the National Carillon in Canberra that was built in 1970. The World Carillon Federation defines a carillon as a musical instrument composed of tuned bronze bells, which are played from a baton keyboard. It has to have at least 23 bells. So I'm going to think about what reimagining is. This definition is to imagine again or imagine anew. And these are some synonyms which I looked at as I was preparing this talk. And I think they all speak to me in some ways and applicable to thinking about reimagining music. So before reimagine, as I said, we all have to decide what was initially imagined. And initially, they imagined music coming from elsewhere, not from Australia. So this talk today follows on from a talk I did in Ceylon. And in Ceylon, I presented about carillon pianolas, which developed in the 19th century. The museum there had a whole series of carillons and musical clocks, which are miniature versions of the monumental versions I just showed. So everyone always asks me why I'm interested in carillons. Well, organists traditionally played on the carillon, and the carillon tower provides unique insight into the evolution of automated music during the 19th century. In technology and how it can sustain Carillion culture. Carillons are public music. It's also an ancestor of music streaming and distribution. Another thing that attracts me to carillons is their open access. And my PhD is about virtual worlds and the sustainability of organ and Carillion culture. So before the carillon pianolas, there were big drums. And these were automated drums that played music. The Carillon pianola, developed by Taylor's Bell Foundry, was a collaboration with Aeolian Skinner, who were very well known with making domestic pianolas, and John Taylor and Co., which is a Bell Foundry in Loughborough. Pianola systems in the carillons were a natural fit. Like the piano in the carillon has dynamic response, and by the 19th century, a similar range. So this is a picture of a Carillion pianola. The pianola rolls supplied to these towers serve as an important arc illuminating the musical culture of performance practice norms of the time. Further research needs to be done examining these rolls. It's something that has been completely neglected and not really known about. In fact, Rex Lawson ran down to me after my talk and said, I've got one. I never know what to do with it, so I'll tell you about it. So it's exciting to find something that no one's really looked at yet. This year I did a field trip after going to Switzerland to the Loughborough Bell Foundry, and I had a look at all their pianola rolls. These are the archivists there who showed me all the rolls, and this is one of the pianolas they have there at the moment. So there's really interesting things which no one's looked at for quite a few years. For example, this is Cradle Song, transcribed by Percy Granger, by Brahms, and it's played on one of the Carillion pianolas in Loughborough. And so music like this would have been sent all around the world, to Australia, to America, and to other automated carillons in the UK. Sydney University Carillon had this in its tower when it first arrived. And this was the sort of repertoire that was played. So you can have a look down the list. There's Bach, there's Handel, Mendelssohn, Rachmaninoff, no Australian composers. And a lot of folk songs which were very popular at the time, and also national anthems. These are some of the archives that I looked at when I was in Loughborough, and there's a whole pile of them that haven't been examined yet. So when I go back there in a few years' time, I'll see what the archivists have extracted. In Bathurst, they had an automated system, which is still in situ, but not functioning. And in Canberra, they had an automated system with a small reduced compass keyboard, which played popular songs. Nowadays, the modern version of the pianola mechanism is the MIDI system. And so most towers have this to play time indications like Westminster chimes. Carillon pianolas in the Australian carillons, I think, are interesting because it's a form of automation where the human beings eventually replace the machine. So it's an optimistic story in our technological age. It's mass music versus domestic mass music, which is what the music boxes and the pianolas usually were, and it's open access. And I think it's interesting to think about this as a form of knowledge distribution in terms of where the roles went to. And I mean, they went to far-flung corners of the globe, and because they were made in the UK, that's where the musical culture was disseminated from. So going back to reimagining, I guess when I think about reimagining things, these are the things I just thought of. I'm thinking of them as public musical instruments. I'm thinking of them as ceremonial instruments. It's a case where practicing is also performing because it's very public. And all these instruments I found have a relationship to institutions, which makes them very rigid and static in what you can do with them. They usually have a relationship to government, either at a local level, like in Bathurst, at a state, if it's a war memorial, or a federal level, like the one in Canberra, which faces the Parliament House. And also these instruments are uniquely bound by a lot of tradition. So at Sydney, there's a notice board where you can find out what is being played. They have a website, but it's quite out of date. So you actually physically have to go there to see what's being played, and which I find quite quaint. So when I thought about reimagining repertoire for the Australian carillons, I drew from experiences I had reimagining musical programming on organs. I was lucky to perform 2 projects at the Sydney Town Hall Grand Organ, which really gave me a lot of insight into how I should approach these monumental musical instruments. One project I did was with a composer called Austin Bucket, and he was commissioned to write a piece for the 175th anniversary of the City of Sydney. The other piece was a piece by an Australian composer living in Ireland, which premiered at the Sydney Festival. So this is Austin's premiere. So you can see it's quite traditional. The audience is sitting where they should be sitting. The organist is up the front, and I've got 2 registrants with me. And so that all looks normal so far. And what he reimagined in this case was he wanted suspended chords, so we used weights. And he used conventional notation, but he also used a colour system to change the registrations. So the registrants actually had quite an active role. This is a still from the other project, Bronze Lands, the Robert Kagenvin's piece, which premiered in Australia. And I was just workshopping different registrations, which I developed. You can see here the audience isn't sitting down, they're lying down, and that's what the composer wanted. There's coloured lights. It was very important for Robert to program the lights, and he did that himself. Everyone's lying down. And so I was inspired by those 2 projects because I found those working with the composers closely, the process of reimagination just happened. A lot like what Nathan described, it kind of happened organically, and it was surprising what eventuated. It's something you couldn't really pre-plan. So in reimagining musical programs for the Australian carillons, I'll start with at Sydney University. After COVID sort of became a bit better, graduations recommenced, and I played for the graduations. On organ, I played a piece called Gaimia Lilies by Moya Henderson, and I asked her permission to transcribe it for the carillon. Having sort of had so much fun working with composers with the organ projects, I kind of lost my kind of phobia of contacting them, especially if they're alive, and I do it all the time now. So I was kind of liberated by that. But it is, I do like the title of this symposium because it is a reimagining of what's possible. And I also approached my PhD auxiliary supervisor, Anna Reid, because she told me about a recorder piece that she wrote on a trip to Antarctica. And because I was traveling to Canberra at the time, I was captivated by her journey and her musical composition because of her journey. So I also transcribed that. I also felt it was important to play her music because she's the Dean of the Conservatorium, which is at a location remote to main campus. And I found it baffling that the musical instrument on main campus didn't have more connections to the Conservatorium. On one of my trips to Canberra, I also went to a premiere with Moya Henderson, and Brenda Gifford was there, and I ended up speaking to her, and she gave me permission to perform her song Mirror, which Deborah Cheetham sang that night. So I tried to pick pieces that had a connection to me, that had a connection to place and also had a connection to my learning. It was important for me to play Anna's music because she's one of the teachers here. And that's why I played John Gowan's piece at the beginning as well, because he's one of my teachers. And I guess it's almost a traditional thing, because I guess a lot of composers like Bach gave their music to their students. So in some ways I thought I was being radical, but then I thought about it. I thought, actually, no, I'm doing what people have always done. And it does remind me of what Nathan just spoke about, where his listening is actually quite a traditional thing. It's radical in its result, but the first principles are on the continuum of tradition. So this is a graduation. I'll just play a snippet and there's only a few seconds of that. And I played a Carillon transcription of that afterwards for the students in the quad. So they had a connection to the ceremony when they were outside. That's a picture of Moya and Brenda. That's when we met in Canberra. And I guess when I was playing, I tried to remember times like that. And so I felt I had a connection to the music. It wasn't just a matter of making sure I hit the right notes or did the right thing. I tried to reimagine the whole process by thinking about the people who wrote the music. In Bathurst, the bell tower's just been refurbished, and there was a first concert last year where I played an elegy by F.S. Kelly. He's an Australian composer who died quite young in 1915. And because it's a War Memorial Carillon, I really wanted to play a piece written by an Australian. I also played Moya's piece at the Bathurst Festival of Bells because I'd already played it in Sydney and I practiced it in Canberra. So for me, it was a way of connecting the three towers and not have them as three separate entities or three separate silos. So in this instance, I tried to reimagine the whole music programming process by connecting the towers musically myself. Now this is from Bathurst Festival of the Bells, and I'm sorry it's a really bad recording, it's only very short, but it's of Moya's piece, which I transcribed for Carillon. And you can see this glare here, it's because my mother actually photographed an iPad with her phone. So off Facebook, so it's not the best, but it gives you a sense of what it's like in the tower. So this is what it looked like outside the tower as people were coming to the festival. And this is just a street scene in Bathurst, which really captivated me. In Canberra, the bells have been refurbished, so I haven't been there as often as I'd liked, but I did spend 5 years there training. A piece that was commissioned by the lead carillonist there from Amanda Cole was premiered in Barcelona with a view to also premiering it in Australia, which hasn't been done yet, but I suspect they will when the refurbishment is finished. So this is Barcelona. It's stunning. It's in the Gothic quarter, and this is the courtyard. So and this is the piece. Did something happen? Yeah, sure. I'll just start playing it.
Yeah. Oops, sorry.
So this is a duet written by Amanda Cole, and she reimagined the carillon as something interfering with fine tone. And I was really pleased to play this in Barcelona because this space is magnificent, and her piece is with that space perfectly. I'll be interested to see how it translates in the Canberra kind of environment. So it's more of a colour. So it's just beautiful. There's orange trees and it's an enclosed courtyard. So Sydney University is a neo-Gothic courtyard. This is a Gothic courtyard and it feels Gothic. It's stunning. So going to those amazing locations also helped me reimagine what it is like to go into a tower rather than going straight to the carillon playing, to actually go to the window, look out to see where I am. And it's something that became really important to me every time I went to play. I went to the window first and spent some time there to see what was in my environment. So that's the Parliament. So we talked about imagining. So 2 minutes, okay. So this is a picture of my real-life PhD supervisor, Danny. So to summarise, before we can reimagine, we need to know what was imagined in the first place. And that's why I talked about what the music was there before. And so this yellow arrow is trying to indicate that we always need to move forward and reimagine things, but we also need to always glance back to see what we did before. So, I'd like to reimagine on a continuum of tradition. And this is a paper I presented with a colleague in Canberra, and because I collated all those ideas, and it became a presentation that we did on placemaking and wellbeing, because it kind of summarised all those elements I just spoke about. And this is the QR code for the paper if anyone's interested. So yeah. So yes, I think the whole process for me was when I first started playing, I felt like I was in 3 separate silos. So after applying all these things to the carillon performance process, I felt like greater connection to the bells and to the people around me. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
Well, thank you, Grace. I really loved your paper. Earlier, you mentioned about this move away from pre-programmed carillons, moving to ones that are played by a human.
Yes.
So with the 3 carillons that we have currently here, they're all MIDI-fied.
Yes.
Do you ever see a transition back to the electronic, to the machine?
I don't think there needs to be a transition. Like with organs now, you describe virtual sounds. A lot of new organs have got virtual stops. So like this meeting, I can see there being a hybrid situation. And I don't think anyone should be afraid of technology. And in fact, no one really wants to ring the bells on midday on Sunday. So if you can program that, it serves a function. So I think it can be used in combination. Like I've had people play pre-recorded things on MIDI generated by the automation to their own, live performance. So I think it'll be a hybrid situation. Yeah.
Other questions? Questions from people on Zoom, please don't hesitate to raise your hands. Grace, I'm wondering about the history of the one in, I guess all of them. Because, as I said at the beginning, they're public instruments, but they seem to be installed in different kinds of public places. So, there's one that we have that services the students here.
Yes.
And then the one in Bathurst looks more like it's servicing the town. But the one in Canberra, where is that, and who is that for?
It's a gift from the British government to the city of Canberra. It's a 50th anniversary. So that's on Lake Burley-Griffin, and it's on a man-made island. It was called Aspen Island, but it was renamed QE2 Island. And the British government, when they gave the Carillon, intended it to be viewed by all the Parliament and all the institutions around the lake to remind them that Britain conferred to them the Westminster system. So that is I'd say that's a diplomatic instrument in many ways. Yeah.
And when was that?
1970, it was commissioned. It was only recently renamed last year. So I went down and Prime Minister Albanese came and renamed the island as a gift to the Queen on her Jubilee. So there's a lot of institutional government type matters involved, and it's really fascinating because it's almost like an interface between the artistic world and government. So if you can develop that communication, you do have a channel to communicate with institutions. And that's what I've learned as well, like playing them. It's been really interesting.
Thank you, Grace. I was actually in Switzerland as well and saw Grace's presentation there, which is also wonderful. I'm really interested, I love the fact that there's the imagining and then there's a reimagining. And I'm just wondering if you could take us through one example of how, whether it's to do with a composition or where you sort of look originally at what was there or what came first, and then how you reimagine with the carillon?
Right, well, I can give you an example from this morning. I was at Garrabarala, which is a knowledge feast that Jackie, Troy and Janelle had. We've been discussing performing the Narrogoo Snow Song. I've practiced it on the carillon, but I haven't performed it. And Jackie gave me permission to play it. And this morning she sang it. And I'd never heard her sing it before. So she sang it with Jacinta. When I practiced it, I recorded myself in the tower with all the noise of the mechanism. And it was, I felt, because, and I played off Professor Barwick and Professor Troy's score that they generated. And I felt like I needed to stick to that because Professor Troy was explaining that they cleansed all the embellishment from the Lotsky edition. So I didn't want to start adding my own without permission. So I guess that's part of the process that I've learned from all these projects is to tread carefully, think about things, listen, and go back to what was imagined at first before I start reimagining. So take it a step at a time.
Thanks so much. I was very interested in your comment about, realising you can approach composers and that's actually a really nice thing to be able to do.
Yes.
Have you had any experience of composers not wanting their music transcribed for carillon?
Well, when I spoke to Brenda, she didn't give me permission to transcribe. She sent me the original score, which I think, Matthew would know. Is it for clarinet? I think, I don't know, have you? I thought we spoke about it. So it's for it's a small ensemble. I played off the score and I improvised off the score because I didn't feel I had permission to rewrite her music. And she specifically said that it was to be played at the university for students. And so I guess that's not a no, but it is sort of stating her wishes. And I guess in the process of communicating with people, you do realise you have to be mindful of what people might want. But yes, no, it was liberating realising I could speak to composers. Actually, it's just one of those exciting things that has happened to me.
Thanks, Grace. So my question is whether or not you've tried composing in the carillon yourself, and further to that, whether it's possible in this day and age to use those drums still, and whether you can fix your new compositions to those.
Yes, I haven't done any composition myself because I feel like I'm still developing and learning. My teacher, John Gowans, he wrote the textbook for the American carillonists for their board certified exam. He does a lot of composition. So in my lessons, he's always explaining to me how he wrote this and how he wrote that. So I feel like I'm in a process of learning and I'm not ready to run my own thing yet. But I'm enjoying him discussing the compositional process. So what was the second part of your question? Oh yes, they're all, look, the last drum that was commissioned in the Netherlands was about 20 years ago. They've kept up their tradition. In Mechelen, which is one of the centres, and in the Netherlands, Amersfoort, they teach pinning, which is the process of pinning the drums. In fact, it's like an early form of programming. So if you take one of the pins, one of the spaces is 0 and 1, it's like the ancestor of MIDI. So it is still alive, and people do pin things for drums. They don't compose for the drums, but they compose Carillon music, and then that's put on the drums. So a drum it's a laborious process and quite dirty. So because there's dust and metal and things like that. So it's pinned maybe once every 3 months, and then that cycle goes again. And in my friend's village, his mother told me that there wasn't change for about 10 years. So they got sick of hearing it.
Might have to wrap up this presentation here, but please join me again in thanking Grace.